You're listening to the Jōrni Podcast. What happens when life brings you to a breaking point, and how do you move forward? Find out more in today's episode. This episode contains adult subject matter, and some listeners may be triggered by this content. Listener discretion is advised. Hi, I'm Petra Brunbauer, and with decades of experience with sadness, pain, anxiety, and stress, I finally figured out how to leave all that behind. And this podcast shows you how to break free permanently so you can reclaim your sanity and find the self-esteem and energy to go after the life you desire. With real talk about mental health, holistic healing, and the tough journey of coming out the other end. This is the Jōrni Podcast. Welcome to today's episode. In this episode, we hear a deeply personal account of living with mental illness. Our guest shares the raw and honest truth about his mental health breakdown, what came after, and how he navigates life with mental illness today. Gordon Campbell is a multi-directional creative, born and raised in the northeast of Scotland. His work as an actor and motivational speaker on the growth mindset has taken him all around the United Kingdom, helping others overcome life's difficulties and negative self-talk. Let's meet Gordon Campbell. Hi, Gordy. It's so great to have you on the podcast today. I've been looking forward to getting to chat with you because living with mental illness is such an important topic, and I am so glad that you're here to talk more about that and share your story with us today. So welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much. Pleasure being here. Thank you for having me on.
Yeah, thanks for taking the time, and we'll dive into your story because it's such a profound and it spans many years that you are going through this experience and living with mental illness. So do you want to share with our listeners a bit about your story, maybe where you consider it started or where you think you became aware of it and how it connects to today, and a little bit about what you do today so we can get to know you?
Yeah, of course. So when it comes to mental illness, firstly, I'll start with when I was made aware of it, because a lot of people, I guess, don't know it's happening when it's happening for the first time. So I was 30 when I was made aware that I was going through mental illness, but it started a lot earlier. So when I talk about my mental breakdown, which is what happened when I was 30, I kind of stemmed the basis of that back to when I was about 19, maybe just before, because I kind of had a lot of habits. I was a smoker. I was smoking marijuana as well. I was drinking all the time. And I don't know how that started. I was a student. It just kind of crept up. But at that time, being from Scotland, in case anyone can't tell, there's a lot of addictions in rural Scotland. And a lot of people come from a very low socioeconomic background as well. So I'm not blaming that or using that as an excuse, but as a young person, you're unaware of anything else. And I always kind of try to stress that. So I think that's how I fell into that kind of lifestyle. And I had a couple of almost attempts at my life, which I, luckily enough, changed my mind at the right times, and that didn't happen. So my background with that was I left home when I was 17 because I knew I didn't want to be part of that socioeconomic situation that was in my small fishing village hometown. And I knew I wanted something else, but I just didn't know what, and I didn't know how to get away from it. So at 17, I became independent and I moved away to go to university. And in that process, I fell into addiction, which was the household that I'd come from was full of addiction as well. So that's kind of in a nutshell, that's my background of the mental illness, because at 19, at 20, and again at 25 and 28, I went through these dull points, like where you feel under a big heavy shadow. You don't know what's going on. You don't know what's happening around you. you start to feel like you're watching your own life happen. And anyone who's been through mental illness will probably understand that feeling and understand what I'm talking about. However, at the time, I wasn't aware of any of it. So to me, I was always just tired. I was always just hungry. I was always just unhappy and I couldn't figure out why. So I always searching for something better when in actual fact, my body just wasn't working properly. When I was 30, I had a very high, it's not high, I wouldn't say high stress, but I had a very high profile traveling job. So I became a presenter and I was traveling the UK. So I was up and down the country all the time in the car, traveling for 5 hours a day, doing 3 presenting sessions a day, running off to a client meeting, coming home, having to make calls, having to sit and do all that kind of administration and all that kind of stuff. So I was always do. Don't stop. Do. Because once I'd done all the administration, I had to go and do the practical side. I had to drive up the country to go and do that side of the work. So just to fast forward a year into that role, I found myself crying all the time. And I wasn't sure why I was always crying. And my partner at the time was quite disconnected because he also couldn't understand what's wrong with me, what's wrong with him. Like, and he could only be there. He didn't know what to say, didn't know what to do. I found myself driving up to Scotland. I live in England. I'm not in Scotland at the moment, so I lived in England. And I found myself driving for 6 hours to go to a job, and I cried for 6 full hours in the car. The feeling of not being in I'm using air quotes, but safe space, and the feeling of being somewhere uncomfortable or the unknown completely wrecked me. And then I didn't sleep at all that night because I was so upset all the time. And then I couldn't get through my first presenting session that day. And my whole body just wouldn't work. Nothing was working the way it should have worked. My brain, I couldn't process. I didn't know where I was. I didn't know what I was supposed to be doing, who I was supposed to be talking to. And I knew I was doing things, but I didn't feel like I was doing things. I was just there. So I think that comes under that whole watching yourself live a life, and you're not physically or mentally in your own body. And that was alien to me. So I had a break between sessions and somebody'd asked me, do you want a drink? I said, no, I'm going to go for a walk. And I just got in the car and I just started driving and I didn't know what to do. And I just cried my eyes out and I could not stop. And then I started having these, I don't want to blow it out of proportion, but like conscious seizures, I will call it, where my body stopped functioning. I was crying. I started sobbing. I couldn't hear anything. I couldn't speak. I don't know how to explain it other than just all those things. And I don't know how this happened. And this kind of stood out to me, and it always has stood out to me. But I looked to my right and I saw a sign at the side of the road that said health center. And I don't know why that was there at that time, because I just stopped the car because I couldn't function. And I looked up and I saw a sign for a health center. So I just drove straight to that health center and I went to the reception. And the best way, I know I just said I couldn't explain it, but I went into reception and she said, "What's wrong?" She just knew there was something wrong. And the only way I could describe it was, "I think I'm dying." And she said, "Why?" I said, "I need a doctor. I think I'm dying." And that was the only way I could describe it. She says, "Take a seat." And I just fell to the floor. I couldn't do anything else. I just cried on the floor. And then the doctor came out 5 or 10 minutes later, sat down. And I mean, if anybody's been to a GP or a doctor for mental health at their worst, they'll know that there's surveys, there's forms. And I just sat there and was like, why am I being asked all these questions? I need help. I'm dying. I need help. And it turns out that he was like, "I think you've got a mental illness." And immediately I thought I was going to be sectioned, sent to an asylum. I had all these images in my head of, I'm not I'm never going home again. And that was the lack of my education to what a mental illness is. And a lot of people still have that idea of mental illness means you can't be part of society. And that's a shame. So that's the background. The outcome of that was I ended up on medication, and my partner had to come and collect me, get in my car, get back to England, and I ended up being off work for 4 months. I became agoraphobic because I couldn't leave the house. Oh, I was just but the start of that process was I thought I was dying because I had no knowledge of mental illness at all. And that's my background. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that journey with us. And wow, as you're speaking, I can feel some of what was going on. And I'm sure listeners who are struggling with their mental health can definitely identify with parts and pieces of what was happening. And also the fact that this often starts much, much earlier before the bottom falls out. But we're just not aware. There's not enough education. There often isn't any support available, especially in rural areas. It was the same when I used to live in Canada. Those rural areas are just woefully underserved for any
Yeah.
of those services. So it's not something that is generally offered when you are having challenges like that. So it often takes a very long time to actually even become aware of what is happening, never mind figuring out a way forward from there.
Mhm.
And our families are just as underprepared usually as the system because they're just not ready for any of that to happen.
Exactly.
So, yeah, absolutely. Wow. And you're right, that stigma, it's still there, unfortunately. And I mean, bit by bit, I kind of feel like through having conversations like that, we start breaking it down a little bit, but it is still there. And it comes on into family life, into our relationships, and also at work. I feel like after somebody finds out you've been to a psychiatrist or you've gotten mental health help, there's something wrong with you, that you're somehow less capable and they can trust you less with things at work.
Mhm.
So, yeah,
Yeah.
it's an absolute real thing. So, thank you for sharing that and giving us some insights into that. Now, how did your journey continue? Because there was sounded like a lot of fear that you didn't know how that was going to go forward, how you could even not stay in a mental hospital. That was obviously a fear of yours as well.
Yeah.
So how did that journey continue for you, and where did you end up finding support, and how did you figure some of these things out?
When it came to support, and I'll just touch on something you said a minute ago. You said that our friends and family don't know what to do. And that's something that I was very aware of. Like mental illness doesn't just happen to the person who's suffering it. It happens to our friends and family as well. From us, it's passed on to those people who don't know how to support us. And when I was at home and I was off work and I became agoraphobic and I wasn't sleeping and I I couldn't even walk my dog, which creates a whole new set of problems and worries. And my partner couldn't do anything, partly because he didn't know what to do. And secondly, because of stigmas and outside circles from our household saying, well, is it this? Is it that? Is it this? Is it that? And all those questions create more problems because it creates situations and issues that aren't even there. And that's, again, lack of knowledge, lack of support from other people, and lack of experience. I wouldn't wish mental illness on anyone because with a broken arm, you can still think clearly. With a broken leg, you can still write a shopping list. When it's internal and it affects the way you live, like not just physically, but it affects your whole entire being. And that energy is passed on to your support network or those who should be supporting you. My partner became estranged over that period of time through discomfort, through not knowing what to do, through just fear, I think was a big part of that as well. He was so scared of what I might do next. And at one point, I was on what I'm going to call suicide watch. He was asking people, now I wasn't suicidal, I didn't need to be on suicide watch. But because of the stigma, I had people turning up at my house just to see how I am. Shall we watch a film? Because my partner's at work. I was like, I'm okay. I'm at home. I'm relaxing. I don't need that extra pressure. But every day, like clockwork, somebody different would turn up to make sure I wasn't on my own and I wasn't this. Do you want to go for a walk? No, I can't. No, do you want this? Do you want that? Like, what? I don't need, like, sometimes we don't need anything. We just need you to know that I'm not okay. That's all. We just need you to know that I'm not okay. Because for some of us, when we're going through that, we know when to ask. That fear of, I've got to say, fear of other people's perceptions isn't there for everyone. And it's really, that situation may have been 100% super helpful for someone else. But me and my personality, having people just turning up every single day, like wanting to do this, that, and that, and it was even more than I needed. And it was too much because they didn't know what to do even when they were there. I think that's the key. They thought they had to be there, but they didn't know what to do when they were there. They were scared to mention it. They were scared to talk about it. I would have rather they just phoned and asked me, how's your mental health? How are you feeling on your medication? What's the doctor been like? Is he checking up on? All those questions are more helpful than somebody who's scared to talk. I think, does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. I think very often our loved ones are grappling with their own fears at that time, right? And they think, well, if they don't say anything, you might actually go kill yourself. So they better be there because they don't know what will happen. But if they give you space, they're afraid something might happen. So it creates this really awkward situation where there's a giant elephant in the room and nobody knows how to talk about it. And I think that does go back also to fear, right? People just don't know how to deal with it. And especially if they haven't been exposed to it or they haven't had any training or education around it. And it's a loved one, right? So of course you're worried that they might be suffering, that they're in pain, and you just don't know how to help them. And very often, like you said, I think we're in a space, I feel like, where it's not helpful to try and put more things on our plate because we're already struggling making sense of the situation that's at hand at the moment. So having to answer all the questions or, oh, I have to go for a walk. Oh my goodness, that means I have to get dressed and put my hair up and like, oh, I can't deal with that, right? So it does add that extra stress that you just don't have capacity for when you're in a challenging situation with your mental health. But I do think it's mostly out of love and care that these situations arise because they are so worried and fearful that you might not be there the next day. So, yeah, but that's a really good point. And I think for listeners who have loved ones that are concerned and friends and family checking in, I think there's something to be said for having a very honest conversation, even if that feels uncomfortable or scary at the time.
Yeah, definitely. And that's one of the reasons, I know we're going to touch on this in a second, but why I wanted to share my book, because it's a real viewpoint on this is what I was actually feeling. This is what I needed at that time. This is what I could have really used with, even if it was just someone to sit there and say nothing. When through that process, it was relevant, it wasn't relevant. And again, everyone's different. Not every one person needs the same thing at the same time. And that's a struggle in itself. But something that my GP did ask me was to write a journal so that I could track how I'm feeling, track what is really going on within me and what I'm thinking about. And do I feel like I'm progressing? Do I feel like I'm getting back to myself? Do I feel like I am deteriorating. You hate that word, but yeah, it needs to be said. So I started writing this journal, and I did the first month in a book so that I could take some time and write and actually think about it. And that progressed after about 1 to 2 months into video logs. So I would just sit and record into a camera and just start talking about what I was going through so that I could watch it back and really feel like I was helping myself. But the journal itself is what I turned into a book. Shall I go into the book now and kind of explain what that is, or?
Yeah, absolutely. Let us know what these journals turned into. I'm very curious. And tell us the title of your book as well so listeners can find it.
So it's called Walks with Sam, which is that's the cover. That's a look. And basically you'll see that there's a dog there. So obviously I said at one point I couldn't even go out the house. I couldn't walk the dog. But when I could, I had this journal in play as well. So I decided to have a walk every single day with my dog Ollie, who's unfortunately no longer with us, but he was my saving grace. He was just me and him in the park. And at the time, I lived in the biggest park in Europe, which is in Birmingham, funnily enough. So we used to just do this lap of about 4 miles, and I would just think. I wouldn't use a phone. I wouldn't sit down. I would just walk, look, watch the dog running. And if I did sit down, I'd sit at a lake and watch the birds, or just time. And having that complete peace time helped me to process a lot. But I found that journal during lockdown, and I decided to sit and read it. And after all the tears had been wiped away from my face, I really realized that my journal said exactly what I've just said, how I was feeling at what time, what I needed. And I thought there's people, like you say, friends and family, who don't know what to do. They don't know what we're going through. They don't know. And I only write from my perspective. Like I said, I haven't dealt with every single illness, mental illness, but I can talk about the things that I have gone through. So what I decided to do was publish my journal and make it a book. But on top of that, I thought if we're going to try and help people who have never been through a mental illness, let me reach out to people who've had mental illnesses that I haven't had. So I think there's about 10, if I remember rightly, 10 other people who've been through postnatal depression, schizophrenia, there's grief disorders from passing of family. Like there's quite a few in here. And I interjected it into my journal so that as you're walking through this journey with Sam, like I'm Sam. I know my name's not Sam, but I've changed every name in the book except Ollie for anonymity. That's not a word. Anonymity. What's that word?
I think it's anonymity.
Anonymity. Okay, so I changed everyone's name for anonymity except my dog, Ollie. So that's why I called myself Sam. For anyone who didn't know me, they could make that person whoever they had in their mind, whether it's a family member, a partner, a friend from work, anyone. Like they're not thinking of me when they read the journal. They're thinking of this person that could be anyone they know going through what we wouldn't wish on anyone. That's where Walks with Sam came from. And during my severe depression, in my breakdown, I wrote some poems to myself. There was a period of time when I couldn't get out of bed and I was just staring at the wall. And before I knew it, an 8-hour day had passed and I'd just been looking at the same spot on a wall without even realizing it. So I wrote poems about things like that. And I've just collated it all into one narrative, start to finish, that you can follow without getting depressed yourself. And that's Walks with Sam. So that's not me, but that's the representation of me, and that's Ollie, my representation of my dog, who
and I will
saved my
just
life.
say here for listeners that you're holding up the book cover because they'll only hear this on audio and they can
Of course.
see a picture of the cover in the show notes. So they can pop over there to make sure they see that, which also has your dog Ollie in it. It's a white dog from what I can see on the cover.
Yeah,
light colored dog.
yeah, it's not actually Ollie. That's a white Alsatian, but Ollie
Okay.
was a chocolate Labrador. Yeah.
Yeah, it's amazing the power that animals can hold when it comes to mental health and the unconditional love that you just fall into with dogs, cats, horses, any kind of companionship with the animals, and how that's a really healing energy because I feel like you don't need to explain to them. They just understand innately what you're going through, and it's such a healing energy that comes out of that. So yeah, well, I'm very glad that we're immortalizing Ollie in the book.
Yeah.
Since he was such a big part of your healing journey, it's wonderful to see that he's a large part of that book. And how does it feel reading back your journal after a long time where you may have not thought about what happened at that point in your life? You may have not been actively involved with that. What did that feel like for you to read that back? Was that a part of your healing journey where you kind of thought, okay, I needed that after some time to really understand what was going on, or did that open old wounds, or what was that like for you to read all that back?
That's a bit of both, really. It's like a double-sided coin because I read it, and like I said, I was in complete bits, tears everywhere, and it was a really hard read to think I went through all of that. How did that actually happen? Because, like I said, I wasn't fully conscious of what was going on especially at the start. But then on the other side of that, once I'd read it, I was like, I've done so well. I have done so well to get through that massive chunk of illness. And I guess just to give everyone perspective, I've never had an operation in my life. Like I had a broken ankle and I broke both my feet, but I've never been under sedation or I've never had a life-threatening operation, touch wood. So I've been very lucky and I'm 44 this year. So to read that and think that's possibly the worst thing that's actually happened to me. And I got through it and it doesn't leave. I struggle with, I know when it's coming now and I know what to do about it now. I know what to recognize that I never would have realized before that journal. But having it has made me, I'm actually really proud of myself. And there's also a side of that where I'm really pleased that I can now help others having been through that. And that's the saving grace in these situations is we are now people who have lived experience that we can put into practice to support the people who don't understand what's happening to them. And that's the gold coin that I would take away from that. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And with there being that huge gap of people needing support and the support there actually is, the people with lived experience, I think they're more and more filling that gap to become sort of guides or supports for people who are going through these struggles and can really identify with what's happening in the moment and maybe just offer even a companionship, a shared a bit of that shared experience that's just helpful all on its own without it becoming overwhelming and feeling like
Yeah.
you're getting stressed out by too much help. So,
Yeah, definitely.
yeah, absolutely. Now, you said that you were estranged from your partner through this journey, and obviously that had an effect on your healing journey as well. How did that play out with your family, with your work colleagues as you were making your way through that in the beginning? How did that affect your relationships and how did you work with that as you were trying to find a way forward?
So there's a couple of sides to this because as I was going through my difficult time, my partner was trying to support me, but I was so aware of the fear behind what. So, I mean, sending people to keep me company, that's beautiful. That's an amazing thing for a partner to do. Although I said it wasn't the right thing, it was the best thing he could do at that time. So I was so aware of that. And I don't want to kind of put that down because that's a beautiful thing for any partner to do. However, coming out the other side of that was that's I started to look at a lot of self-development. Like, why do I feel this way about myself? What my illness did was it shone a bright light on me and how negative I was to myself. So that's when I started self-development. I started working on myself. I decided to go to the gym. I wanted to lose some weight and I started to lose lots of weight. So when we started to drift apart, it was partly because I was changing so much. And what that does in quite a lot of relationships, from what I can gather, is it moves that light to the partner who isn't changing, and they become maybe self-aware a little bit more. It affects their self-esteem slightly. They don't want their partner to change. Everything was perfect until this thing happened, and like, why is everything changing? And in a way, they may start to resent us for that. However, for me, I think it's an understandable resentment. It shouldn't be frowned upon because we never asked to change. We had to change. And that just played out by my my partner and us arguing all the time because he couldn't understand why I wanted to go to the gym when he was not at work, and why don't you want to spend time with me? And I was just so focused on I have to better myself to the person I want to be so that I can stop feeling rubbish about myself. That was my goal. And if I swayed from that, my mental illness would come back. I just knew it would because that was the basis of where it kind of started from. And it just kind of crumbled from there over the course of a couple of years. Yeah, what's the word? I am very envious of partners who can work together during those times. And I think they're brilliant to work through it and accept the new version of that relationship. And unfortunately, we just weren't in that place, which is fine. It doesn't always work out. So
Yeah. It's a difficult realization, I think, for a lot of people to come to when you said one partner changes and the other partner looks at it and goes, why? What is happening? But often that happens because in the run up to that, nothing was perfect. It just seemed that way. And we were hiding a lot of different things that were actually happening to us already. So that other people may have just not been aware of. And so, of course, when the bottom falls out, all of that comes to the surface and is all of a sudden seen. And yeah, that can create a lot of changes and some tension as well.
yeah.
On this journey so far now, you said, of course, it doesn't go away, but now you have more awareness. You know how to cope a lot better. What has been maybe the most helpful thing to you on this journey that you have found for building awareness or building your capacity for resilience, or a coping tool that you have come across? What have you found most helpful?
Oh, there's quite a lot under that umbrella, and I don't want to talk too much about everything because that's just too much information. But for me, it's the wellness. It's I'm aware of it. I've been back to my GP over the last, what are we on now? Over the last 15 years. I've been back a couple of times for my deep depression, and it's been managed. Now got the tools to work through it, and I know what to do, how long it's going to take. Nothing's a surprise anymore. And I think that's great because there's a bracket that I know what to expect. And I can say, okay, for the next three weeks, I'm going to settle into my medication, and then for 4 weeks after that, I just need to stay calm or whatever it is, and I need to do a few more walks or maybe go swimming. Swimming is great for mental health. I think it's the water, the sound of the water. Yeah, it's beautiful. So having those tools are brilliant. And what's actually transpired from one of my visits after lockdown, it transpired that I've had BPD, borderline personality disorder. I think it's also called emotionally unstable personality disorder. And I've been suffering with that since a teenager from traumas I had in childhood. So because I've kind of dealt with, that's just a personality for me. I'd already been dealing with that for 40 years. So there's nothing I have to worry about because I just know who I am now. But the process of knowing who I am came from recovering from mental illness. But wellness plays a massive part. The food you eat plays a massive part. The activity you do plays a massive part. The people you spend time with. plays the biggest part because you become your closest circle of people. Yes. And I'm sorry, I've not lost. I have moved away from a lot of people in the last 15 years. And it's for the best outcome. Everything's been so much better for it.
Comes with its own awareness in that sense, right? When you start to become aware of what gives you energy and what takes it away and where that line is. Yeah, absolutely.
You can't be scared of change after something like that. Once you've been through your first set of awareness of your own mental illness, what else have you got to be scared of? Like,
absolutely.
That is the worst. Like, you can't be scared of telling someone, I'm not here for this. I will speak to you later, but I'll just go keep my distance from now on. That's fine. Like, you're not saying you hate them. You're just saying you're not my kind of people anymore.
Yeah, and boundaries are good. Boundaries are good for mental health.
Yeah, definitely.
Absolutely. And like you said, you're proud that you made it through that. You're still here standing. You made it through that worst thing in your life. And I think we need to recognize that through these struggles, we sometimes also find that strength that we didn't know we had in dealing with mental health challenges, physical challenges, emotional, mental. And we really should give ourselves a pat on the back that we're still here and we're still muddling through that, discovering new things about it, becoming aware of other things that are cropping up through this. But yeah, there's a strength there that often we find. So yeah, well, it's been amazing listening to your story and just hearing how you went through all of that and how you've grown yourself out of these challenges. And you want to just maybe share your 2 podcasts with us before we sign off, because I think those will be really interesting to our listeners because they can find some more resources there as well for the book and also for your other podcasts. Would you like to share a little bit about that?
Yeah, of course. So I'll start with the book podcast. So because I wasn't putting together an audiobook, I put a 12-part podcast together, and it's actually called Outside the Sadness, Walks with Sam. So it just delves into some of those mental illnesses that aren't covered in the book. In each episode, we'll cover a bit more information about what those mental illnesses are, what the kind of outcomes of that might be, what people might need from those. And then in each episode, we cover a couple of chapters from the book in each one. So as you work through each episode, you get to hear the book if you're not a reader, if you don't like to read. But also, I will just add, I forgot to mention it earlier, the book is available for free on the Kindle Unlimited as well. So you don't have to pay for the book if you've got Kindle. My second podcast, you'll probably think I've done this on purpose, but the color of it is the color of this jumper. And it's basically called Mamwa, Middle-Aged Man with an Attitude. And it's basically just a series of conversations that I resonate with. So it covers 4 main subjects, things that I love in my life: traveling culture, film and music, spirituality and wellness, and fitness and health. And those are just the things that I kind of live by on a daily basis, things that I do. And we just have some open conversations, rant sometimes, and we just give lots of advice on what's working for us and hope that you like it. And if you're a traveler, there's loads of advice on where to go next. So
it's always good to keep that eye on going forward, right? Picking new things to do, maybe new places to travel to kind of keep your mind focused on going forward. So, yeah, that sounds wonderful. And so for our listeners, if you don't like reading, make sure that you listen to the Outside the Sadness podcast, which will break the book down in audio format and give various additional things about that as well for the chapters. And yeah, tune in to Gordy's podcast, the Middle-Aged Man with an Attitude podcast. Sounds like an amazing show. And we'll be linking to all of those in the show notes as well. So you can check there on how to get a hold of Gordy and connect with him for the podcast. Of course, if you have Kindle, you can find the book there at no charge. And I'm guessing your book is available on Amazon and everywhere that books are sold for our listeners. So we'll link them up to that. And thank you so much for spending time with me today. It has been such a profound conversation, and I'm really glad that we can have an honest conversation about what that was like for you so that our listeners might feel a little bit less weird, a little bit less scared or self-conscious about what they're going through. And we're going to try and normalize these experiences as part of our lives, as part of us being human. Because it happens, and it happens, I think, now a lot more frequently, and we need to talk about it. So thank you for that vulnerability. Thank you for all that honesty that you brought today and sharing your story. I truly appreciate it.
More than welcome. And I really hope that anyone listening or watching does find some solace or help in everything that we've discussed today, because every little does help, especially when we need it.
Absolutely. So we'll share this far and wide and make sure we get the word out and share the story some more. And thanks everyone for tuning in today. It's been a wonderful episode. And from our end, we encourage you to sign up for our podcast perks on the Jōrni Podcast website. From there, you can get a free account with us, and you will get access to all of the freebies that our guests are giving away, and you'll get some behind the scenes information, access to our production calendar. So check that out so you can stay connected with us and have even more of the Jōrni Podcast in your life. So thanks so much. And thank you for being here, Gordon, and take care.
Bye, guys.
Thank you so much for taking time out of your day to listen in. If you enjoy the Jōrni Podcast, please support us by subscribing, sharing on social media, and leaving us a review. We appreciate you. And you can find more of The Jōrni on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and our website, thejorni.com. Sending you love and courage, and see you next time.